Hi everyone, welcome to our very first Aldea NextGen podcast. We have had such a big question to emotional regulation the last few weeks that we've decided to have our very first topic for the podcast based on emotional regulation. Now, Sumay Purchase is the clinical director at Aldea, and she recently did a workshop on emotional regulation. So, Sumay, please share with us why you are so passionate about this topic.
Thank you, Shuri. One of the reasons why I'm so passionate is because there's so much sometimes negative behavior that can be, or behavior that can be perceived as negative. And in the meantime, there's actually a lot that you can do to help your child to regulate their emotions. And today, we're going to look at a couple of ways in which you can simplify it for your child so that they can recognize their emotions in a much easier, simpler way, and then also know what to do with it. And we're also going to touch on, here and there a little bit of, just how you as parent or caretaker can really help the little ones through it. And one of the ways that I believe in is by giving each emotion a color. And I've done this with so many kids before, and you've done it with so many kids before, is the zones of regulation. So what we do basically then is we have four categories of zones. And for each emotion, there's a color. So, for example, sadness is the blue zone, fear or anxiety is the yellow zone. Green zone is happy. We always want to be in the happy zone as much as possible. And then the red zone, which is our angry zone. But there's certain things that can trigger certain emotions. And yeah, I think that's very important to identify those in the first place, to be able to guide your child in terms of, okay, listen, maybe this happened, we're in this color zone now.
Okay, perfect. That is so true. Yeah. So, May, while I quickly talk about the triggers of emotional regulation and everything that you just named now, it would be nice to maybe share with the audience an image that you have on these colors, just to make something abstract more concrete. But I'll quickly go into the triggers as well. Talking about emotions is a very abstract thought. And many times when we see kids who struggle with emotional regulation, it's these very tiny bodies and these big emotions. And sometimes it takes a drop of a hat for a child to just completely explode. And you don't really know what's going on. Sometimes when we do our interpret sessions, we play snakes and ladders, or with our older kids, we'll play rummy or ticket to ride just to see how they actually regulate emotions. Because there's nothing that can bring out an emotional regulation issue like losing a game. So when this child is playing
Absolutely.
snakes and ladders and they're moving up the ladder and they're almost at the top, and suddenly they have to go down the snake. And they have this big issue of, I was just on top, now I'm at the bottom. How do I deal with this? Another big thing that triggers these emotional outbursts is hunger or being tired. And oftentimes we think, okay, but my child is now 5 years old. They shouldn't behave like this when they are tired. They're not a baby anymore. But when you and I are tired, we are not the happiest people in the world.
Absolutely not.
Yeah, so, obviously we can't expect something from kids that we are not willing to just cope with.
Definitely. And there's something that I always say that's important to remember is that take the emotions that you experience as an adult when feeling that way. And, put all those emotions, all those frustrations, everything like that, put that in a teeny tiny body and see how much you struggle to regulate your emotions, and then we expect of those tiny humans to just be okay with it. And I think that that can sometimes be an eye opener. It can sometimes help, asking yourself that question and just realizing what we are sometimes expecting of these little humans.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the big thing is emotions, they are quite abstract. So saying, please identify how you feel is very difficult for a child. So having something like a feeling chart or a feeling wheel or a feeling thermometer handy, or when you are going to share with us your image to say, I
Yes.
am in this color, that is very important. So some of the cues that I found that can really help with that is giving your child the opportunity to ask 3 questions. Number one, what am I thinking?
Mm.
I'm thinking I'm going to never eat again, or I'm thinking I'm going to fail this exam. Identify the negative thoughts and then
Yes.
go on to the physical feeling of the body. How do I feel in my body? My face feel warm. My heartbeat is speeding up. I'm sweating. To make something that is a thought that is
Mm.
abstract now something concrete, a feeling. And then to ask, how do I act? Am I shouting and being angry? Do I just shut down? Um, or do I
Yeah.
just avoid different tasks? And this is so important because as therapists and as professionals and as parents, we always think there must be a tick list, but kids act very differently. I have 2 boys and they have very different ways
Absolutely.
of
You know,
showing their.
there's no
Simai,
yes. Sorry, technical glitch.
okay?
Yeah, I think it is, there's no one specific way or one recipe that you can follow step by step. And that's often what a lot of parents are looking for, a lot of teachers are looking for, caregivers, is what steps can I follow in order to maybe prevent some emotional meltdowns or things like that. And it's exactly what you're saying, Shiri, is that there is no blueprint for this, unfortunately. But the image that I'm going to share now is definitely going to make it a lot easier for everyone to help guide kids into the right direction, just to start with the emotional regulation. So the following image really helps children because they can truly um, identify rather the colors of the emotions sometimes with the feelings. And as we can see, here, we have even the inside out characters, which a lot of children identify with. If you ask them, if you tell them about sadness or joy, they know exactly who you are talking about. And they know the way that these characters act within the movie. So if you have a chart like this, having something that is visually represented makes it a lot easier for a child to be able to identify their emotions. So as we can see, like I said before, the general emotions that we might get in these different zones is in the blue zone, it's sad. Okay, because sadness is there. It's the picture represented there. In the green zone, it's joy. Yellow is fear. And then in the red zone, we have anger and disgust. The nice thing about a chart like this is that it's not only guidance for the child, but also for the parent. Because as we can see, there's not only this one emotion captured in each color, but there can actually be quite a variety. So as you go on, and one of the key factors with emotional regulation and teaching your child emotional regulation is repetition. You have to do it again and again and again and again. And, referring to these zones, if you can identify the emotion in your child, you can perhaps tell them, oh, I saw that made you really sad. That must mean you're in the blue zone. Do you agree with me? You're in the blue zone. You can go show them the blue zone. So in terms of that, it really, truly does help. And then once they have a basic grasp on the most basic emotions that go with every zone, then you can start to elaborate and perhaps add one or two more emotions, like I'm feeling sick or I'm feeling tired. And that also means that I'm in the blue zone.
Yeah, this is really a great chart. And I think I'd like to, for us, just after you've done your coping skills, maybe go into one or two of the kids that you've seen in practice who actually fall into these zones, just as an example. But this is a really great way for kids to identify something so abstract and make it so easy to say, I'm feeling in the blue zone or I'm feeling a little bit in the red zone. It's just an easier way to say something. My child is an introvert and he easily says, I'm moving a little bit into the yellow zone and then into the blue zone. He says his heart is getting tired of spending time with people. So you need to teach kids the easier way to express their emotions. And this is a great chart to use for that.
Absolutely. It's like you said before, is that emotions are very abstract. It's very messy, and it's difficult to identify your emotions. And one or two of the kids that I've had, some of the children actually go to the extent, one or two of the children that I've seen, when they are, for example, in the red zone, they go into kind of aggressive behavior, because these emotions are piling up and piling up and piling up, and they don't know what to do with the emotions because they don't know the correct, perhaps, coping mechanisms to implement for each zone. So what do they do now? They go into fight or flight, and sometimes when it's the red zone, everything becomes too much. And what's the easiest way for them at that moment to cope is fight or flight. So they either completely escape the situation, or they might start showing some aggressive behavior. And that is where we as adults step in and we say, okay, we really truly need to help this child regulate. And we can do that by looking at different types of coping mechanisms. For every child, the coping mechanisms are different. It depends on from the one to the other, because something that might work for one child in the blue zone might not work for the other one. In fact, it might escalate the emotions even more. So it's very important. A piece of advice that I always give parents is that, especially in something like a workshop, etc., is to really sit down with your child when doing the coping mechanisms. It doesn't have to be a formal meeting setup or anything like that. You make it fun, make it an afternoon activity, or on the weekend, you make it really fun so that they see these coping mechanisms as a fun way of regulating. They don't see it as another chore that I have to do, or my mom is telling me to do this now. No. So something especially for the smaller kids, you can make it into an arts and crafts activity and tell them, okay, so these are the type of things that we can do. Which ones do you like to do the most when maybe you feel this way? Or, oh, let's maybe do this activity over here. Do you think you'd like it? Because for them at that moment, it's really an informal conversation. But at the end of the day, there's so many results coming from there, because now not only are you able to tell them, but remember, this is the game that mommy or daddy or your teacher or whoever else, we spoke about this and you said that you really like it. So it's also providing them with a sense of, wow, I really enjoy doing this, instead of, ugh, now they're telling me to calm down or something like that. And these coping mechanisms, there's 4 categories that are quite important that you can use when you want to guide your child into these coping mechanisms. And these 4 are the following. It's movement skills. So literally where you might go outside and throw a ball, or you go for a walk, or you go for a run, or they jump rope, they jump on the trampoline, anything like this it's included in movement skills. The next one is relaxation skills, where you go lie down on the bed, you just make yourself comfortable, just take a minute for yourself. And if your child tells you, but mom or dad or teacher or whoever, I need a minute to myself, don't necessarily take that as, oh, but they're just withdrawing now. This is a very negative thing. No, that is them regulating when they are, implementing some relaxation skills. And sometimes it is, us as adults as well. I don't know about you, Shuri, but sometimes I definitely need a minute to myself.
Yeah,
It,
definitely.
it doesn't mean that I hate anyone. It doesn't mean anything negative like that. It just means that, I need a minute to just gather my thoughts, gather my feelings. And then when I get back to you, then the chances of me saying or doing something that I might regret is much smaller. So relaxation skills is definitely one very important coping mechanism. The next is distraction skills, where you can actually involve your child in an activity more like a play activity. Let's build some Legos, let's draw something, let's paint. Really distraction from their emotions. And of course, as the adult, it'll sometimes be up to you to be able to identify, okay, the child or my child is in the right headspace for this now. So okay, let's go ahead. Maybe they're feeling a little bit in the blue or the sad zone, so we can maybe do something to distract them from those feelings and just take their attention away from it. Or if they're in the yellow zone, just before escalating to the red zone, let's build some Lego. What do you think we have to do over here? And then the last one is thinking skills. Truly being able to take your mind off of the negative train of thought that you have. And this is something that we mentioned in, well, actually both our recent webinar that we had and also the workshop that we had, is how to help your child reprogram their train of thought, reprogram the way that they're thinking about something, in order to get a more positive perspective of the situation rather than necessarily a negative one. And this is something that Aldea truly, I would like to say that we thrive in, is teaching a child those mechanisms, and also teaching the parent those mechanisms, in how to guide your child, to help them to be able to think more positively about a situation rather than seeing only the negative. Because what happens then is that they get caught in a loop, or essentially, like a triangle. It never ends. And the questions that you asked earlier, Cherie, is crucial to this point, because those questions can also help you, I almost want to say, make a break in that vicious cycle, to be able to identify, okay, this is where I am now, but how can I maybe see this in a different light?
Right.
So that's also one very, very important example. I once had a little boy that, throughout the session, sometimes there might be triggers, like you said earlier, in our interpede sessions, in our individual sessions, when we play games, the end results of some of the games might not be exactly what the children want. If a child might be very much of a perfectionist, and they put that amount of pressure on themselves, then this is a loop that they can get caught in easily. And that's literally where you have to sometimes even take the activity away and tell them, okay, let's just take a break quickly. Let's think about something that's important to you, something that makes you feel happy. And for this little boy specifically, it was his grandma. So then, knowing that, I would then ask him leading questions. For example, things like, what's your favorite thing that grandma always does? What does it feel like when you give grandma a hug? So you really try and almost in an indirect manner involve their senses in the situation so that they can really put themselves into that situation. And it's not only like a vague thought that they are going into, but truly a deep thought.
Mm.
And that they can almost, I want to say, escape the situation that they are currently in and just take some time and once again just take a minute to breathe and gather your thoughts.
I think that's a very important point that you're making, because when we speak of emotional regulation, we often think it's those angry kids,
Mm.
it's those kids who throw stuff around. All the kids are daisies. We always think it's those kids. But you had a yellow block in there that said loss of little control. And in essence, it's very important to find the child in that block, to find the child before the child enters the red block. Because once a child has entered the red block, whether they are crying, I had a little girl who cried from the entrance until entering my practice and the way back home, nonstop. We always think it's the tantrums, but it's really not. And
Mm.
once they are in that red zone, there's absolutely nothing you can do before they calm down. So that's where I always tell parents, having time out is not punishment.
Mm.
Teach your child a very important skill. Teach them to take themselves out of a situation, something, like you mentioned, Sumay, at the end of the day, we are also very much the same. You also want to take a breather. So there's no point in shouting at the child or trying to lecture them now on how they're wrong or how their emotions are silly. There's no point. It's not going to go in. That's where parents usually say, I talk and talk, but it goes in and it goes out. Yeah, it will. Maybe get your timing better and give the child some time to just calm down. And after the child has calmed down, you can go and sit down and say, okay, let's talk a little bit about what just happened. I think that's very important. And with you bringing up the perfectionist as an example, that's another example. As a society, we see kids as, oh, perfectionism is wonderful. It's not wonderful. It's a lot of anxiety and pressure on a child. And it's another emotion that needs to be regulated. So it's important to know that emotional regulation is not just anger and violence and aggression. It can be immense sadness. We had our child depression webinar. It can be pressure that they put on themselves. It can be a whole range of emotions. And that's why I like that chart that you put up, because all of the emotions can fit in there somewhere. And that's very important. So, May, you usually at our workshops, you make a little worry monster. What is a worry monster?
So a worry monster is actually quite a simple project that you can do with your little ones. Once again, it's something that adds to a little bit of coping mechanisms. So it is literally just a quick explanation of how you can make it. It's a small normal box, and you and your child can sit together, or it can even be some alone time if your child wants it, and they can put googly eyes on it, they can put arms on it, they can put shapes on it, whatever they want, because it's their worry monster. They decorate it as much as they want. And then what happens is that there are pieces of paper that's nearby, close to the worry monster, or that can be provided, or however. The thing about the worry monster is that it eats up your child's worries. It eats up some of those negative emotions, some of the negative thoughts that they might have. So what happens then is that if your child enters, I basically want to say any zone except for the green zone, then they can, depending on their age, depending on their preferences, draw their worries, draw the reason behind why they're sad, angry, scared. They can draw it and they put it in the worry monster. And once again, this depends on from one situation to the other, from one child to the other. But then after either writing down or drawing what is worrying them, then they put it in the worry monster. And this can then be, it takes them in their mind. It's a way of getting rid of those emotions, because the worry monster eats it up. Okay, essentially. If you see that your child maybe needs to talk, or you know that your child likes to talk about their emotions, then you can always go back after them writing it down, after them drawing it. Then you can go back and say, let's see what your worry monster ate up. And then they can tell you about what happened. Of course, this is done at your child's pace. Okay, because the drawing and the writing down also serves as a coping mechanism. It can go into the two categories, actually, if you want to, the three categories of relaxation skills, distraction skills, and the thinking skills. Because in that time that they take to write it down or to draw it, they truly reflect, and they're paying attention to the details, of, yes, it's still the same situation, but now they have an outlet for it. And when they put it inside the monster, it's almost a visual representation of, now it's gone. We can let go of this now a little bit. And then, like I said, you can read the situation and see if your child really just needs to let go of this, or is it something that's really going to affect them more emotionally. And we need to maybe have a chat about this a little bit later on. So there's a few ways of adjusting it according to age, according to emotion. But that's also one thing. And the emotion monster or the worry monster is something that is really and truly, I want to call it a zone of respect, from the parent side towards the child. Okay, if your child maybe insists, not today, I don't want to do it today, or I don't want to talk about it, then you need to also respect those boundaries. Or you can say, who do you want to see what's in your worry monster? Because when a child is struggling with emotional regulation, they feel out of control. Hence, of course, the behavior that comes from that. So telling them, you choose, who do you think, who do you trust with these emotions? And then it's not a case of, oh, but my child likes me less than the other person, or yay, I can rub it in, my child likes me. No, nothing like that. It is absolutely about, what, I truly think that this person will be able to help me most in this situation. Maybe someone else can help me a little bit more in the other. But it's a zone of trust, and it's truly about, respecting your child's decisions to eventually get to the end goal of helping them regulate and perhaps talking through it with them. So yeah, that's the worry monster method.
And a tissue box works very well for a worry monster, doesn't it?
It's perfect. Perfect. You reuse, reduce, and recycle.
Perfect. Thanks, Sumay. Sumay, just in conclusion, you mentioned at the webinar you spoke a lot about modeling emotional regulation, because now we've spoken about teaching a child to regulate, but you also mentioned that modeling is very important. Can you please give some insight into that?
Yes, of course. So, oftentimes, when we talk about a child's regulation or emotional regulation overall, then we put a lot of emphasis on the child's regulation. And one thing that is very important, that actually plays a very important part in your child's regulation, is your own. Now, by saying or mentioning that an adult has to self regulate, you often think, okay, this means now I have to go behind a closed door and experience my emotions by myself and work through it without my child seeing. Okay, because for years and years before, this has been the image, that has been passed on, is that adults can't experience these feelings. And I mean, that even sometimes goes over genders. Um, if you look at perhaps moms versus dads, something like that. Um, but the contrary is actually true, is that you need to show your child and share with your child your emotions. Now, I'm not saying during your worst day that you now need to go and have your absolute emotional meltdown and everything in front of your child, because we also still have to protect them. Okay, so I'm not saying go and maybe the meltdown that you have in front of your husband or your wife, go have that in front of the children. Not at all. Okay. But what I am saying is that communicate your emotions with your children, communicate the reasons behind those emotions. And if you can use language that's on their level. So say, for instance, you have been working on these zones of regulation now, and your child understands the different colors. You can tell them, mommy's really in the yellow zone today. You won't believe, this person told me something that upset me, and I really didn't appreciate that. So that made my heart go into the yellow zone. But I'm really trying. What do you think I can do? Or maybe just give mommy 5 minutes and then I'll be with you, or something like that, because then you're taking your child through the process. Because something that I've experienced or that I've heard of a lot is during these times when, from my side and from the parent side, we're teaching the child emotional regulation, guiding them in it, then oftentimes the child will start identifying the zones within the parents. So then they'll tell mom or dad, but you're in the red zone right now. Don't you think you need to breathe? And sometimes parents will be like, what my child is telling me what to do, how to feel, how to regulate. And we should actually have a mind shift towards that, to be like, you know what, they're actually recognizing this.
Yes, Sumay, I completely agree. I think one thing that we've seen a lot in practice after COVID is kids not being able to actually identify emotions because they haven't seen emotions being modeled around their houses, and actually staring at my face because they're trying to meet the and like I said, you should be open to your child, and you are in this zone and you are in this zone. my own child does it a lot, where he says, "Why are you irritated with me now?"
Mm.
Or "Why are you angry?" And then you have to say, you can't just say, "No, I'm not." You can't disprove what they're saying. You have to validate it by saying, "Yes, I am irritated, but I'm not irritated with you. I'm irritated with the way people are driving on the roads," or whatever. So you have to validate that so that they can see that, yes, number one, I can identify emotions. And number two, the way that it is being regulated and handled is not correct, but I know the correct way of doing it. I think that is the most important thing of today's podcast is identifying emotions, but then also identifying that there are ways to deal with these emotions. And you've actually given quite a few great coping skills for us. So thanks for that, Sumay. And we hope that you all had a really great time with us. And we look forward to having you again next week.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us. We appreciate it. Have a lovely day.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.